Hi, my name is Doug Wilson. I'm a Civil War reenactor. I got interested in the American Civil War when I was in 5th grade. My 5th grade teacher, Mr. Rubio, helped bring history alive for me. And I'm proud to carry on that tradition, keeping history alive through reenactments and living history events. At reenactments, I portray a first sergeant with 140th Pennsylvania Volunteers, Company A unit that was formed in 1862 in Greene County, Pennsylvania. In fact, they were formed right here in this building, Hannah Hall, on the campus of Waynesburg College, now Waynesburg University. But I'm just a reenactor. I didn't actually serve during the American Civil War. What you're about to hear, however, are stories from those who lived and sometimes died during the war between the states, the American Civil War. These aren't words from historians or teachers. These are stories from those who lived through these events. I hope you enjoy In Their Words, a project of the Greene County Historical Society. Enjoy.
I recollect distinctly that the first man who enrolled his name under mine was James M. Pipes, and the second one John A. Burns. I rode over the western end of my great county recruiting, and Burns attended me and was a great assistant in this work. In 2 weeks, our company was overfull as enlistments went on quite lively. On the morning of August 28th, my squad rendezvoused at Jacksonville, and bidding friends goodbye, we took wagons and arrived at Waynesburg in the afternoon. Washington Pipes, having 2 sons among my recruits, went with us and stood up in one of the wagons and carried Old Glory. On the way, the boys sang, "We'll hang Jeff Davis on a sour apple tree." At Waynesburg, we met McCullough, who had brought with him about 45 men, and Taylor, who had about 25, while I had 33 men. The name of our organization was chosen after considerable discussion, that which was first proposed being the Downey Invincibles, in honor of Robinson W. Downey, deceased, a prominent and liberal-spirited lawyer of Waynesburg who proposed to make the company his by purchasing its uniform and otherwise caring for it. About this time, we erroneously learned that no more cavalry regiments would be received by the government, and as we would, of course, go as infantry, we settled on the name of Greene County Rifles. As none of us who had recruited for the company knew anything about infantry drill, we called upon James B. Leisure, Esquire, now Vice President of Central Bank in Denver, Colorado, who had received a military education at West Point. He drilled our men in the steep facings and company formations, and in the afternoon we marched to the North Common south of the old college building, and there an election with written ballots was held for company officers. My brother, Colonel D. Gray Perman, who had been wounded at Shiloh, Tennessee, was home on furlough on crutches and used his hat for a ballot box. The almost unanimous result of the election was McCullough for captain, Taylor for second lieutenant, and myself first lieutenant. The next morning, we assembled in front of the courthouse and received many heartfelt goodbyes and God bless yous, as well as many substantial tokens of goodwill in the way of things for our comfort in camp. Reverend William Campbell, now deceased, of the C.P. Church, made a party address to it, which was responded to by Captain McCullough to the tune of "The Girl I Left Behind Me," played by J.W. Little, who was then only 17 years old, now Dr. Little of Washington, D.C. We marched out of the east end of town and took wagons in Hookstown for Rice's Landing on the Monongahela River. When the river was reached, I acted as orderly sergeant and called the roll on the riverbank, and addresses were delivered from the hurricane deck of the steamer Elector by Judge James Lindsay and Colonel D. Gray Perman. We all got aboard the steamer, but the river was low, and more than once we ran aground on the sandbars. On one occasion, we all waded through the shallow water ashore and walked for miles until the worst bars were passed. Arrived at Pittsburgh, we marched into Camp Howell. Here we met companies from Washington, Beaver, and Mercer counties, and we were mustered into service to the United States. A flag presentation occurred to Captain Gregg's company from Monongahela City, at which a portion of the Greene County Company attended, and Honorable George V. Lawrence and Honorable A.A. Perman made speeches. The latter, among other things, said, that he had two brothers going out to defend the flag, and he would rather see them brought home feet foremost than either of them should show the white feather. In a few days, we moved on to Harrisburg and marched into hot, dusty, dirty Camp Curtin. And here we learned that we were to be united with the Washington, Beaver, and Mercer County companies into a regiment of Western Pennsylvanians to be known as the 140th Pennsylvania Volunteers. Richard P. Roberts of Beaver was chosen colonel, Professor John Fraser of Cannonsburg lieutenant colonel, and Thomas P. Rogers of Mercer major. Here we received our arms, uniforms, and accoutrements, being armed with the Vincennes rifle musket, a heavy cumbersome gun with a saber bayonet, which we gladly exchanged for the Springfield rifle when we reached the front. Some quite laughable scenes occurred when the uniforms were issued by the quartermaster. A 6-foot man would get trousers and shoes intended for a man measuring 5 feet 6 inches, and vice versa. The little fellow would get number 10 shoes and trousers half a foot too long. But by a system of exchanges, all got reasonably well suited and clothed. We understood that our first duty was to help guard the Northern Central Railroad, the then great single artery through the flowed and patriotic lifeblood of the nation in the shape of the men and munitions of war from north to Washington City. It was soon ascertained that our destination was Parkton Station, where we arrived September 10, 1862, and embarked into a clover field. The headquarters and several of the other companies established themselves in tents on a hill overlooking the railroad, giving to their location the name of Camp Seward, while the balance of the regiment were stationed along the road at different points for a distance of 10 miles, reaching from the line separating Pennsylvania from Maryland to Moncton Station. The barracks at Parkton, which had been occupied by a company from the eastern shore of Maryland, was assigned to us, and the Marylanders were sent on to take part in the work of driving Lee across the Potomac. At a meeting of the captains of the several companies, the letters from A to K were placed in a hat, and each captain drew his letter. Captain McCullough drew A, and so we became Company A and the right of the regiment. Suffolk, Virginia, November 17, 1862. Dear Uncle, I received a short letter from you several days ago, but have been so busy fixing up our tent that I've had no time for letter writing. We got logs and built a pen the size of our tent, about 4 feet high, and put our tent on top. We have a brick fireplace in our tent, and as the chimney draws very well, we can make ourselves quite comfortable these cool evenings. Indeed, if we ever get to occupy these quarters all winter, we will be as comfortable in body as if we were at home. It has been quite cool here the past 2 weeks. We had a snow about a week since and a few days of real November weather, but it is warm again now, and today it is quite pleasant without fire. I hope you all succeeded in weathering the storm up there, but I'm afraid you had a rather serious time of it, but I hope you did not expose yourself. I deeply regret the condition in which you were placed, but am, as you know, powerless as far as aiding you is concerned. The prospect of either of us getting home is to my mind anything but flattering. There is some talk of our captain being appointed major, and in the event, I suppose, Paul would become captain, although he prefers his present position. I do not know how it will turn out. Papa is out now with the ambulances. Quite a large party went out in the direction of Blackwater today. They took 3 days' rations. From some cause, our regiment was left behind, but Pa went with the 15 ambulances. They may see snakes before they return. Heavy cannonading has been heard in that direction several times today. I suppose you have heard of Tom Nicely's death. He died near a week ago. His discharge papers were received a day or two ago, but he did not need them. Will Pitcock is looking for his papers every day. I hope he may get them soon. Davy Graham will, I think, be discharged also. I was very sick week before last and part of last week, another attack of fever, but now I'm doing duty again. The soldiers were very indignant at the removal of McClellan. Indeed, no act of the administration has met with such universal condemnation. McClellan was never so popular as now. I have myself sometimes thought he was a little slow, but you nor I never dreamed of the extent to which opposition to his plans was carried. An hour's reading from a pamphlet by the Prince of Jumonville, McClellan's French aide, has given me more insight into the Peninsular Campaign than I had ever gained before. The authorities at Washington gave him repeated promises of aid, promises which they never intended to fulfill, and which were only given that McClellan might be disappointed. McDowell's whole corps was promised to assist in the taking of Yorktown, even after we had arrived on the peninsula. The breaking of this promise caused the delay of a regular siege, and yet they joined the cry of inactivity. Shame on them. Please write at your convenience. Yours, M. Lafayette Gordon. The stories of the Civil War veterans you have just heard are yet another iteration of Greene County's proud military history. These men's grandfathers and great-grandfathers fought in the American War for Independence, which separated us from Great Britain in 1776. Now we're going to hear from some of our Revolutionary War veterans. It was about the 1st of June, 1775, when I went out to guard the coast about the commencement of the war for 2 months as a volunteer militiaman under Captain Condit in Menham Township, Morris County, New Jersey. I was about 20 years of age and was stationed for the most part on Trimble's Point between Elizabethtown and Amboy, and after my time expired, I served again for 2 months in the same manner. Shortly after this, I emigrated with my father's family to the western part of Pennsylvania, Greene County, where I have resided ever since and still reside today. Shortly afterwards, in the summer of 1777, about the 1st of July, I went out to volunteer under Captain William Harrod against the Indians and marched to the flats of Grave Creek along the Ohio River. We were called scouts or Indian spies. We had no colonel or general officers with us, but Colonel McCleary and Colonel McFarland commanded in that part of the country, and occasionally, after serving about 4 months in this way as a private, an election was held by the company for officers, and I was elected captain and was accordingly sworn in and commissioned at Phillips Fort, where court-martial and other military business was done and meetings held, and I was a captain of Indian spies and rangers. Having recruited and supplied my company, we marched to a place called Gerard's Fort on Big Whiteley Creek in Greene County, where we made our headquarters and collected our supplies, and where I fell back when pressed by superior numbers. I continued to command and serve at this place from the 1st of June to the 1st of October in the year 1778. The enemy retired and hostilities were not resumed until about the middle of May 1779. I again raised my company of spies and rangers, and we established our headquarters at Ross's Fort on Ruff's Creek, about 6 miles from where Waynesburg now stands in Greene County. From this place, where the neighboring people were forted, I marched with my men in different directions toward the Ohio River, scouting, watching, and pursuing the enemy. Many people were murdered in every direction around, and when intelligence was brought of these depredations, we pursued the enemy until danger in that quarter disappeared. I was then employed in guarding the settlers and contending with the enemy for 5 months this season until the middle of October. The next spring, the latter part of May, the enemy reappeared at Ross's Fort, and I again called out my men and took command as before. We pursued, and the enemy, who had murdered many families on the headwaters of Whiteley Creek and on Dunkard Creek, and thence to the headwaters of Fish Creek that empties into the Ohio River, about 20 miles below Wheeling, Virginia. Whilst pursuing the Indians on Fish Creek this season, which was 1780, on a steep hill while passing over a rocky place, I fell and split the calf of my knee so that I was unable to walk and had to be carried to the fort on the horse that carried our provisions. I was unable to pursue any further service until nearly a year afterwards. I was out for about 4.5 months. It was around June, about the time of the first corn hoeing, that I was again called by danger and alarm to the field, being still in command as captain, and my service was again required. My company was collected and reorganized and was part of the summer station at Bell's Fort, higher up Ruff's Creek. We were employed at guarding the people at various other forts, Jackson's Fort, Klein's Fort on Muddy Creek, and we retired later than usual in November. I think early in the month it was, making this time of service more or less 4 months. In the spring of 1783, I was stationed with my company at Seals Fort, about 4 miles from Jefferson. And at this same spring until sometime in October, we were in this fort in the surrounding country protecting the settlers from hostile incursions of the enemy. If I was to enumerate all the times I served in the forts and fields, I feel confident would exceed more than 3 years. And though all evidence of my commission and times have been destroyed, there are still some who remember my time in service as a captain in the Revolution. In April of 1776, I volunteered as a private Indian spy in the county of Augusta, Virginia, which is now part of Monongalia County of Virginia, for a period of 3 months under Captain Owen Davy. With a few other men, I was placed at a fort on Buffalo Creek, which was in Monongalia County, and I was ordered by Captain Davy to spy from this fort on the waters of Buffalo Creek, Fish Creek, Dunkard Creek, Bingaman Creek, Fishing Creek, and Little Fish Creek. All these waters principally heading together, and some leading to the Monongahela stations, and the opposite ones to the Ohio River, which the Indians would ascend as their warpath runs along the waters of said courses. When we intended to make an incursion upon the frontiers under our service with Captain Davies sometime in June, I discovered a party of Indians on Fish Creek along with my friend Gillis while we were on our way to Buffalo Fort. Gillis and I hastened to that station and alarmed the laborers working in the fields of the impending danger. We went into the fort as the savages approached the neighborhood and laid ambush in the fort for 1 day and 1 night. The Indians, realizing their approach had been discovered, killed 1 cow and departed without doing any damage then. Given the number of the enemy, it was considered not advisable to pursue them from the fort because we were of such an inferior number. That was the only incident of note during this period of service. I was discharged in August of 1776, then in March of 1777, I was ordered out as an Indian spy and private by Captain John Miner to be stationed at Statler's Fort on Dunkard Creek in what was then Augusta County, Virginia, and now Monongalia County, Virginia. I was ordered by Captain Miner to spy up and down the same waters as my previous period of service, having become acquainted with them. We did not engage in any conflicts that season, and I was discharged by Captain Miner in November. Then the savages were heard from on the headwaters of the Monongahela River and about Fort Pitt, where Pittsburgh now stands, and Wheeling on the Ohio River. They were committing great havoc and murder. In March of 1778, I volunteered as a private Indian spy under Captain John Lucas for a period of 6 months and was stationed again at Statler's Fort on Dunkard Creek. Captain Lucas placed me, or ordered me, to the waters of Buffalo, Dunkard, Bingaman, Fishing Creek, and others to spy upon the Indians, and in this excursion, I discovered the trail of a large number of Indians who made their way down Bingaman Creek in July of that year. It was a branch of the West Fork River. I hastened to Statler's Fort to alarm the people of what I discovered, supposing they would visit the fort if they had not already been there. On my approach to the fort, the marks of distress were obvious. The night preceding, the enemy, consisting of about 100 warriors, destroyed a number of about 25 men who were out working some corn about 1 or 2 miles from Statler's Fort. The savages placed themselves in ambush on either side of the path leading from thence to the fort, and on the passages of the laborers to the fort, who were carrying some pork with them. They were fired at by the savages, and 18 of their number were killed dead on the ground, among whom was my father, Joseph Wade, and also Jacob Statler, Michael Kidlinger, James Piles, John McDaniels, and others. The number of the enemy so greatly overpowered those within the fort that the fort was kept closed until time had proved their departure. When we repaired to the ground upon which the bloody deed was committed, we interred the mangled limbs of those who fell at the charge of the enemy. Nothing of any particular interest happened after that, and I was discharged by Captain John Lucas in October of 1778. Feeling myself so much grieved at the destruction by the savages and hurt at the loss of my father, I volunteered in March of 1779 for a period of 9 months, again under Captain Lucas, and was stationed at Martin's Fort on Crooked Run and a branch of the Monongahela. My service was of vigilant and continuous nature until I was discharged in November. In April of 1780, I was ordered out by Colonel McLean of Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and placed under the command of Lieutenant Cooper of the Pennsylvania Militia to march to Hannahstown on the water of the Conemaugh River to drive away the Indians of that section. My service continued 1 month, and I was discharged and returned from Pennsylvania to Virginia, and in April of 1781, I was drafted for 6 months' service under Captain James Cochran of the Virginia Militia. Then I marched to Fort Pitt and from thence to Wheeling on the Ohio River and stationed at Wheeling Fort for a month. Then I ascended the Monongahela River to Morgantown and was stationed again at Statler's Fort on Dunkard Creek, and there dispatched as a spy where I spied on the waters of Harrison, Monongalia, and Tyler counties in Virginia until my tour was up. It was in May of 1778 that I entered the service of the United States at Gerard's Fort on Big Whiteley Creek, now in Greene County, Pennsylvania, but I'm not certain whether if then it was Virginia or Pennsylvania. I served under Lieutenant Samuel Swigler and was marched from Gerard's Fort to Mattress Bottom on the Ohio River and was there placed under the command of Captain Cross. I believe his first name was John. From there I marched across the Ohio River to the mouth of Big Beaver, where we built Fort McIntosh and continued there until sometime in September and was marched to the Tuscarawas River. On our way there, 3 of our men were killed by the Indians. There we built Fort Lawrence, and I continued until my 6 months of service expired. I then volunteered under Captain Clark, Colonel Gibson commanding, for 1 year and continued at Fort Lawrence until the middle of January before anything material happened. At that time, the Indians came and took our horses from the fort some distance. The bells still in hearing, a party of our men went out after the horses, not knowing the Indians were with them, and all were killed but 2, and they were taken prisoner. The same day, a large party of Indians, supposed to be 600 or 700 in Indian file, crossed the prairie in full view of the garrison, and there encamped and continued for 5 or 6 weeks. We had with us a Delaware Indian by the name of Thompson, that went to and fro from the Indian camp to ours, and through him an arrangement was made by which we were to give the Indians some flour and a little salt, and they accordingly went on their way. We seen nothing more of them for 2 or 3 days. Captain Clark sent out with 15 men to see if any sign of the Indians remained, and they were all killed except Captain Clark and 2 of his men. A message was then sent to General McIntosh to Fort McIntosh, informing him of our situation. We were scarce of provisions, so much so that we ate the hides of our beef and their guts. Sometime in March, General McIntosh came to our relief with a considerable army. Fort Lawrence was then left under the command of Major Varmus. Colonel Gibson marched his troops to Fort Pitt, now Pittsburgh, and there I was placed under the command of Captain Brady, and continued at Fort Pitt until sometime in July, when we were marched to the headwaters of Nemeshilling Creek, a branch of the Tuscarawas. Here we took an Indian town and killed 8 Indians and took some squaws and boys prisoner and lost 3 of our men with several others wounded. I myself was wounded with a blow to the back of my neck with a tomahawk. From there we returned quickly to Fort Pitt, where I lay unable to do anything until the last of August. Not being able to do duty, I had permission to return home and did not return for some time. The next spring I volunteered under Captain Wetzel for 6 months, and nothing material happened. In the spring of 1781, I was appointed a spy for Colonel William McCleary of Morgantown, and continued to perform the duties of a spy for 6 months, frequently seeing Indians but having no encounters with them. In 1782, I received a similar appointment from Colonel McCleary about the last of March. On the 4th of May, Corbley's family was killed. John Miner, now an associate judge in Greene County, Pennsylvania, took command of us, and we pursued the Indian trail, come nearly upon them, and went on top of the hill and lay down for the night with about 400 or 500 yards from the Indian party. For the night we were alarmed, and one of our party shot. We heard something fall, ran up to the scalp, and found it was a hound dog. This alarmed the Indians and they fled. We pursued by daylight, followed them to the mouth of Miracle Run, where we saw considerable signs of the Indian. Miner concluded we had better return, and we returned to Gerard's Fort. On our return, we saw Indians, and the people were all alarmed and fled to the fort. Captain Miner then directed me, Richard Hall, and William Hanna should take 6 days' provisions and reconnoiter the country and see where the Indians were. We did that and followed to a small blockhouse and saw considerable sign of the Indian and supposed the Indians were near. We passed a little farther. In a few minutes we were fired upon. We wheeled and ran. The Indians pursued. We met other Indians who hallooed at us. We halted and the Indians fired. Hannah fell by my side. I was shot through the arm. Hall, I think it was, fired and killed an Indian, and I made my escape while the Indians pursued and continued to fire upon me. I arrived at a little blockhouse on Little Whiteley, and from there I was taken to Uniontown, PA, where I was attended by Doc Sackett, who I understand is still living. This ended my service until the end of the war. William Stiles, George Wade, James Troy, Eliel Long, Zachariah Piles, and others of my neighborhood can testify as to my character and veracity. Thank you for joining us for In Their Words, a production of the Greene County Historical Society. I would like to dedicate this video to Private John W. Eddy of the 140th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, Company A, who was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg and died on January 27, 1864 at the Confederate prison at Belle Isle, Virginia. Thank you for joining us.